welcome all you wiretappers out there. Back here in the studio with our friend, co-host Cam Robinson. Hi, Cam. How you doing?
Glad to be here, Gary, as always.
As always, still working on your 1960. Is it a 66 MG? You got it running. You told me.
I am. I'm running back from the gas tank to the carburetor, trying to trace leaks, and I'm right at the carburetor now. If I can move to the ignition sometime this coming week, I'll be one step ahead from where I was last week.
All right. Well, good, good. I bought my own old vehicle. I bought a 1974 Honda CBF 350. It's a lot of fun, but it's not. It's zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance, just like zen in the art of English sports car maintenance. You have to be very precise about everything you do and think about everything you do. I haven't put a choke on a car for a long time, and now you have to. If it's cold, you got to put the choke on just a little bit in order to get it started. See, you know what I mean? And I have a little petcock that I shut the gas off underneath the tank whenever I park it, just in case. And I have to take the key out to the left, not to the right. Otherwise, the parking light does some kind of a parking, the tail light will stay on. So
I got to pop the hood to turn the heater on. And heating was an option on mine. So I got to open the hood and open the heater valve.
Yeah, well, there you go. Just about says it all. Well, we're going back down south, down under to Australia again. Our good friend Dan Bashford down there. We did one with the Drangheta influence in Australia, and this one's going to be at the request of my friend named Farrell. Farrell's a new fan who made a nice donation too. Thank you, Farrell. And he spent his own little bit of time in jail. He's at a turnaround in his life. He works in high steel now, maybe up on the top of bridges and buildings and things like that. I jokingly told him, I said, you haven't lost your taste for the adrenaline rush, have you? which I hate to say it, but I can understand that. So that's hence the two motorcycles. So I got all that, but Farrell in particular, he asked about George Freeman, and so I looked him up, and Cam looked him up. Cam did a whole bunch of research on George Freeman. We did the other was the out of Italy, the Drangheta, of course, more based on the old mafia lines and the stories that we usually do is about the mafia, but this is more what we affectionately call a non-Italian or a Peckerwood. Organized crime dude, right?
That's right.
Had you ever heard that term before, Peckerwood?
I hadn't. We've Al Capone had the American Boys, as we talked about on the show. But yeah, and there's always sort of in the non-Italian branch like they had in Rhode Island, but the Peckerwood I think might be particular to Kansas City. But I reckon
it might be in our kind of hillbilly ways. I always joke about my hillbilly accent here, my Northwest Missouri nasal twang. I was learning Spanish one time, and still working for the police department. And one of the clerks there, I was kind of practicing a little bit, and she says, you speak Spanish with a hillbilly accent. I said, what do you mean? But I knew what she's talking about. It was all in good fun. But anyhow, on to George Freeman. I'm not talking about the COVID anymore. It's it's still not over, and it won't be over for a while. But I can get out and play golf again. I think a lot of people are out working again, and you're going into work, aren't you?
I'm going in the end of this week. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. A lot of people are. So I'm not, and I, like I said, they're playing golf again. So I'm out there on the golf course, not putting out the extra one, but we're still putting out a high quality product, as you folks know, and we work hard to do that. And Cam's a big part of this, doing this research and getting these really good, accurate stories out. It's important to have accurate stories, and Cam is the guy. When I discovered you and you did your first research, I said, this guy does not deal in myth and rumors and whatever he can find in the internet headlines. He goes into it, and I know the fans out there appreciate that.
that was what really got me sold on you to begin with. Here, it was getting the real inside scoop. So that was why I reached out.
Yeah. So anyhow, let's talk about George Freeman. I see from all these are Cam's notes, but let me kind of get this kicked off. He was kind of like all of our mob guys. He's a little bit younger than the mob guys that we use, the old timers we deal with. He was born in 1935. First arrest was in 1947, of course, as a young teenagers for theft. He has small time jobs. He was a stable hand and does petty crime. Ends up in a boys' home, like a juvenile detention center. I noticed that a lot of boys were brutalized. They're brutalized by the older boys primarily, and sometimes you'll have guards that'll brutalize those young boys. Those guards, there's certain pedophile men that will gravitate to those kinds of places where they can do that. They did a whole movie about that with Kevin Bacon. I can't remember the name of that, but that's quite common, and that traumatizes. These boys are already behind the eight ball in many ways, and then they get put in a detention home like that, and it's it's a gladiator arena in many ways, and especially back then in the 40s and 30s and even the 50s. God, I remember when I was a kid, they were talking about if you get in too much trouble, you go to the Algoa Reformatory, and I never did. You'd get threatened with it every once in a while. I never did anything that bad. It was not a serious threat, but there was a couple of kids that did, and it was not. They did not come back with fun and game stories. I know that.
And you see this theme a lot with these guys is the guys you think of as being really tough, but they as they go in as young kids, it's the experiences they have are just awful.
Yeah.
All kinds of things that happened when they were kids that really shaped who they would become.
Yeah, that'll make a criminal out of anybody. Talk about a traumatic experience and then reacting to your post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, it's, I'm not excusing illegal behavior by any means, but many times there's a reason for it. They're not just born with a criminal mind. It gets shaped and formed out of lack of opportunity and other horrible things that happen to people as children. But anyhow, he was a bright young man, and which served him well. He stayed in the thug world. He spent most of the 1960s getting arrested and figuring out what kind of crime he wanted to get into. He was particularly good at betting on horse racing, setting odds on horse racing. Now I've heard of guys like that. They can really study those racing forms. And you have you ever done that? Do you take a look at a racing form when you're getting ready to bet and try to figure out, find a good horse out of that?
I've been to the races once and I've tried to play the odds. I've not had much luck. My mother-in-law is honestly pretty good at it.
Some people are good.
She has done well, yeah. But I am not so much of a numbers guy when it counts.
Here's some tips on that for you folks. Here's what I'm doing. I've not really won a lot of money, but I have taken a couple of long shots, but I usually end up losing it all by the end of the evening because you keep going. But you'll take a low odds horse, one of the favorites, like a 2-to-1 horse. And then you'll try to find a horse that comes in maybe at 15-to-1 or 20-to-1, a lot longer odds, that has a really good jock on him, that has a lot of wins, and try to put some of those factors together, and then take them, box them, maybe find 3 horses like that. You find another horse that has a pretty decent jock on it and has in between odds, maybe 6 or 8-to-1, and then do like a trifecta and then box them. So whether it's they're 1, 2, and 3 horse, so whether they come in 1, 2, and 3, or 2, 3, 1, or 3, 2, 1, or whatever combination they come in, you're a winner. And you take one of those for like $1 on each horse. So you can do that for about, I think it ends up being about a $10 or $12 bet. And if one of the long shots comes in with the favorite, in either whether it's first or second or third, then whether it's maybe an exacta, that's just 2 horses, or a trifecta, which is 3 horses, that'll pay more. But you get those long shots coming in the second and third, and with a favorite, why you can win some money on that one bet.
You're going a little fast here. I'm trying to take some notes.
Next time you go up to Arlington, they still running in Arlington? I went up there years ago.
They tore down a track. I'll have to dig into it and call you back. They did tear down. I can't remember which one they tore back down. It was a while back, but I can't remember where the tracks are here. I used to go back in Virginia, Colonial Downs outside of Richmond.
Okay.
And I went to
Arlington. Arlington's probably still going. It was a reasonably
it was a big
track and big deal. The other Sportsman's Park they had up there, I know it's been torn down. It was over in Cicero.
That's the one.
So anyhow, I kind of digressed on the betting on horse races, but that's how he met this. He met another guy named Lennie McPherson that will become his partner in crime. Another guy named Stan Smith. Tell us a little bit about this Lennie McPherson.
Lennie McPherson had really established himself. Arlington is still open, by the way. I just double checked, and I'll be heading up there this week, thanks to you. Lennie McPherson was a little bit older. He had established himself. He had really muscled his way into the criminal world. There, a couple of key early murders he had committed during the 50s that are pretty well known throughout Australia, and I don't think they're on Wikipedia, so I need to go back in. But he really worked his way up, and by the 60s, when he ran into George Freeman, he was a pretty well-known crim, they call him. And he sees this guy, Freeman, who's sort of bumbling around in the rougher aspects of the criminal world, but he's damn smart, and he can do what's, the SP bookmaking, the starting price bookmaking. And he says to him, George, you're really wasting your talents trying to, with all these robberies and all these, you're not a mid-level guy. You're a brainy guy. It would be, I guess, like a Lefty Rosenthal trying to knock over, it was that kind of smarts. And I guess Lefty Rosenthal would be kind of how you would compare him. So George had Lennie McPherson had the operation set up to where he could bring on a guy like George Freeman and get him established in a regular position. He had casinos, and so they set up their own betting parlors and casinos, and he established George Freeman as his top guy, setting up betting, and they basically owned the gambling market by the end of the 60s. And in doing this, they had another guy, Stan Smith, who was the muscle. Stan was more of a hitman, and his name later arose in about 25 shootings during the 50s and 60s. So you get these three guys really coming together. Stan Smith was sort of more of the hitman. He was also a brainy, really smart guy. And you've got Lennie McPherson, who was the muscle, and he was older than these two, and he sort of came into his own, created his operation, and then he puts these two young guys to work. So by the middle of the 60s, they're running all the betting throughout. They were in New South Wales. I'm sorry. And what you also had at that time is the New South Wales Police Department was notoriously corrupt. There were major investigations throughout the years that would come much later, but they had police on the payroll, they had police committing crimes. So between these three guys, the timing was really there, and they got the operation going by the late 60s.
Yeah, I noticed that at one point in time there, McPherson was on trial for murder, and he was found with a list of all the potential jurors for his jury trial, and he had to get those from the cops, and any good organized crime organization, any good criminal organization, to be successful, they've got to have good political contacts and good contacts with corrupt officials, whether it be the courts or the police. If you can do both, like they did, like the outfit did in Chicago, why it's great. It's just that's the only way it really works for them, is you have to have official kind of approval of that. I mean, the police and law enforcement can put down any kind of criminal organization at will if they want to. And if they don't want to, then they can foster it and help it grow and allow it to grow and really make it much bigger and more important than what it might have been. So so these guys, they had it going. I see they even got into drug smuggling back then too.
Right. Yeah. Stan Smith was sort of in the drug smuggling. The other two didn't. They didn't. McPherson and Freeman did not. They didn't appreciate the drug smuggling, I guess, but they allowed it because Stan Smith, he didn't lay his hands on it so much. He controlled a large marijuana smuggling operation, then eventually moved into heroin. Their main racket was they controlled all the gambling in Sydney, and in conjunction with that, like most operations, they had all the loan sharking. So, if you've got the gambling, you might as well have the loan sharking also. And just like you had in America, you've got celebrities, and you've got, like you said, politicians and everybody coming to their casinos. So they had the glamour and the sort of the same aspects that we had in America. They had around their casinos. They were sort of the guys in the way that you would see in Vegas, you would see in like the Copacabana in New York. McPherson and George Freeman and Stan Smith, that was their operation in Sydney, basically controlling things as throughout the 60s and into the 70s.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that their base in New South Wales was Sydney. They were the mob in Sydney, Australia, during this time, and the Drangheta was in Melbourne. What we talked about, they had that grocers market in Melbourne. What's interesting is boy, marijuana must be a big deal over there in Australia. Everybody must smoke pot over there or something. That's all those Drangheta guys are into, were big time marijuana growing and smuggling, and they got into heroin, cocaine later on. And I see this guy's in marijuana, and then he eventually integrates heroin. So and I'm sure he would have moved on into cocaine if he was still around when the cocaine hit. Oh, and another thing, in our last show about the Drangheta and drugs over there, I think I was mentioning that to get cocaine out of Colombia, how did they get here? Did they go through the Panama Canal, which is dicey at best, or surely didn't go around Cape Horn? And I got a response from an Australia guy, and I can't remember his name now, and he remarked that, well, Colombia goes all the way through to the Pacific side. I didn't realize that until then. I had to get a globe out and look, and by golly, it does. So you can have, and he named the port. I can't remember the name. There's a big port on the Pacific side of Colombia. So I thought it was just on the Atlantic side. So I stand corrected on that, and thank you to whatever wiretapper's name that was that corrected me on that.
We get a little myopic, and we Americans, geography it's not our thing here in America. We are, as the world likes to remind us, we are not too good outside of the continental United States.
Yeah, and look at me, I'm just a humble little country boy from Missouri in the middle. They want me to know about worldwide things.
You tell them.
You know what I like to say? Well, I'm just a poor country lawyer. I don't know much.
Just hang out your shingle.
Yeah. Anyhow, moving right along. Who's this Stuart John Reagan in the 60s and 70s?
Reagan was kind of he was one of those guys you get in the criminal world every once in a while. He's kind of a psychopath. He rises up. I'm going to take control of these things, and you get these guys every once in a while, and you hear about them in different places. And so he starts building a rival operation through the 60s and the 70s, and he does a lot of indiscriminate killing. He's kind of a lunatic. But the problem with a guy like Reagan is they start drawing a lot of heat. I mean, obviously the cops will look the other way as long as murders take place within a certain sphere. But this guy Reagan was shooting people in the streets, and then eventually he was with his girlfriend, and he was supposed to babysit her 2-year-old son. And of course, the 2-year-old son goes missing, just disappears. And Reagan was the last person with him, and Reagan was not fond of children. I mean, the guy was not, he was a criminal, but he was just a total psychopath. So it was basically he was was known that he was responsible, and police were really starting to turn up the heat on anybody associated with him, and to that extent, the entire criminal world, because there was public outcry about, well, now the criminals are going after children. And because Freeman and because McPherson was at the top of the food chain, he sent Freeman and Smith to go take it out. There was one other guy up there with there was another guy, I can't remember his name, but basically McPherson said, we've got to get rid of Reagan. So Freeman and Smith got the contract and went out there and took him out. They shot him 8 times, once in the face for each person was killed, and once in the face for the kids. So, it's kind of like one of those symbolic hits that you see in the underworld.
Yeah, they do. Organized crime does like to leave them. Either the body's never found, which is a message in itself, or there's some kind of a message in how the body's found, or something about it. So, yeah, interesting. Now, here's what I find interesting is the outfit ends up sending somebody down to make connections with them. And I'd read that before, and I'd looked into it a little bit, and this kind of a minor guy, wasn't exactly a high up, well-known outfit dude. He was more like a really good, clean associate. It sounds like
right.
Joseph Dan Testa went to Australia.
He was a developer, kind of a guy that he could buy property because he was.
Yeah, he could have stuff in his own name and act as a straw for them and things like that. Interesting. So he ended up doing business with McPherson,
right,
down there.
Yeah. As gambling was getting big in Sydney, this is the 60s were at the time when the U.S. 65 would have been shortly after Cuba closed down in 59. So they were looking for opportunities to expand, and the outfit was all over the world. All of the mobs were. They had junkets that went everywhere for gambling.
Yeah, Gincana had stuff in Iran and were some other place over in Caribbean, I believe. So yeah, they were.
Right. And I know out of Rhode Island they were sending gambling junkets all over the Caribbean also. So they were looking all over the place. And you had Angelo Bruno going to England. So there were the small gambling parlors in England. They were doing the same thing in Sydney. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what happened is they sent this clean man who was a developer, quotes in the air,
to new business.
Exactly, to go to Australia to look into invest. So of course, the first thing he invests in is a construction business.
Yeah.
So he was also a property owner throughout Florida and Chicago, so that's also not suspicious. But who he answered to was Milwaukee Phil Idaricio, who was responsible for outfit gamblings. He was under Gincana and had gambling holdings in the Caribbean. That was in it's a book called Captive City, and that was written in the 60s, and Milwaukee Phil was overseeing the gambling in the Caribbean at the time. So he would have been responsible for reaching out to Australia. And Testa answered to Milwaukee Phil directly. So being sent as an emissary to Australia makes sense at the time based on what Milwaukee Phil was responsible for. And so Testa is in Australia at the same time, making contacts and investing with McPherson. Shortly after that, in 1968, George Freeman and Stan Smith come to Chicago for 6 weeks under the auspices of staying with Testa to solidify business in the construction, to work on things with the construction.
About the construction business, correct. But really it's probably more about gambling and I know she had something about video poker and right. That got really popular.
Yeah, they were looking to distribute video poker machines, and I think that Bally video poker machines, and I think Bally was outfit controlled at the time, I believe. I can't remember exactly, but so Freeman and Stan Smith are in Chicago in 1968 for 6 weeks, and if they're coming to meet with Testa, that means they are under the supervision of Milwaukee Phil. And so there's no record, obviously, of what they did for that 6 weeks. But if they're in Chicago, two international criminals who come to stay with an outfit clean man, I mean, I can only imagine that they might have rubbed elbows with some guys in Chicago. So I thought that that was a really interesting kind of tidbit, and the kind of stuff that you and I really like is when these guys internationally, or these different organizations meet with each other.
Yeah, they kept that one on the down low. They
Oh,
knew
yeah.
enough. Let's just keep these guys on the down low and not be taking them out in public and having these public meetings and everything. And that was like, boy, I tell you, the 70s, by then they were like late 60s, 70s. The outfit was at its peak, and they owned Chicago. They owned law enforcement up there. They owned the court systems, and they were getting away with a lot of stuff. It wasn't until the middle 70s that anybody really started getting any inroads into what they were doing up there.
Yeah, I mean, you had Bill Romer running around, but there was way too much control of the government.
Yeah,
local governments here.
So I see eventually the government's going to turn around on them, huh?
Yeah, you've got these what's called the Moffat Royal Commission in 1973. It was named after a New South Wales Supreme Court judge, Ethel Moffat. It was very similar to the Kefauver hearings in the McClellan Committee, and it was a major attempt by the government to investigate organized crime in New South Wales. And they called several organized crime figures, much like they did in Kefauver and McClellan, and they interviewed them. I couldn't find much of what I found a few snippets, but there was obviously no information given by anybody in organized crime. I don't know if they have the equivalent of the Fifth Amendment, but I know they gave circuitous answers and didn't say much. But it really, in seeing a lot of these guys on television, or in the papers, basically being brought to the public, it really did wake up people to a lot of the organized crime that was going on in New South Wales, and it really made these organized crime figures much more public than they had been in the past, and it sort of directed a lot of attention to a lot of the corruption that was taking place and the criminality in a lot of these places.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, was casino gambling. They were like us. They didn't really have casino gambling during these years.
I think they had the small parlors like what London did. They had the
okay.
They had the legislation. Well, I think they had small legal gambling parlors like what they had in London. I know that there was legislation for that, and I know that they had. It may have been illegal gambling. That's where I was kind of up in the air, because I saw them talk about legislation and I saw them talking about gambling parlors. The legality, from what I was reading, was kind of up in the air. So maybe somebody can clarify on that. And it might have been all underground, and because it was so corrupt, it was allowed. But they were very public about having these gambling. And I know
I see that in 1976 they got caught in a bribery attempt to members of the parliament to gain control of a casino licensing board. Yeah. So they must have pretty well set up their gaming just like they have in the United States. And it's a little bit, like you say, it's like England. England had small betting parlors and small casinos for quite a while. They get this connection with Chicago during this time, and they're going to know about Las Vegas, and they're wanting to set up big casinos. They know that the demand is out there, and at that same point in time, why other states are starting to look in the United States, everybody's starting to look at gaming as another source of tax revenue. They're getting tired of seeing all their money go out to Las Vegas and being kept out there. And they're all, Missouri and all the states in the United States are starting to do that. And you get your gaming control boards, and that's a huge deal. They need organized crime needs to get control of those boards, because that's who sets the standards. That's who hires the investigators. That's who reviews the investigators' work. I worked for our gaming control board here in Missouri for a while, and actually it was a contract thing I had with them. I wasn't an employee, and they controlled everything, and they controlled it. They had like a retired state trooper and a retired judge and some other businessmen on it. So they were pretty rigorous here in Missouri. But if you can get your own people appointed to that, then it's Katie bar the door. You know, they can hire a director of gaming that is going to be run a much looser ship, who will then hire people who will not do the investigations quite as good, because you can either do a good investigation, a background check on a licensee, a potential licensee, or you can do a bad one. It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
And do a good one, why they'll find out the dirt. But if you do a half-ass one, then you can slip anybody in with the gaming license. And Chicago had a ton of experience by then in subverting money from the big legitimate casinos. So I see a Chicago influence here, them trying to get control of their gaming control board.
Yeah, yes, but now that you see a lot, and this during this whole time, you see this. There are pictures of Testa and a couple other Chicago periphery figures back and forth on hunting trips, and a lot of investment coming back and forth between us. And I don't think for a minute that it was control. I think there may have been money back and forth between Chicago and Australia, like you said, in an investment capacity, because they knew who the key players were down there. And if I were going to invest money in Sydney in the 60s and 70s, it would have gone through McPherson.
Yeah, and I see in George Freeman's biography, George Freeman and autobiography. They talk about him using a forged passport to go to Las Vegas and meeting with Testa and setting up these legal casinos. Chicago, they were like all over themselves, boy. That be a partner in a legitimate casino down in Australia, because that was 1978. By 1978, that was the year that we started taking them down. They were at their pinnacle. They were at their most arrogant top on control of big casinos in 1978, and it was all downhill after that. By 80, they were booting them out. But so they stayed at the dunes, and everything was comped.
Yeah. He had 50,000 of his own cash, because he said that was one of the quotes in the article I read, is he said do not take any money. He said, we're not going to, he said, we will gamble on our own money. Do not take cash from anybody. That was, I guess, I don't know if that's an underworld thing. They know better than to accept cash from one another. But
I think it's a smart move on his part.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Believe me, when it's as the Godfather told the Undertaker, someday you'll be able to do a small service for me, and I'll take care of this for you. That's how it works, man.
Exactly. So, and who he may have run into in at the dunes is I don't know. It's again, that the details of that trip are sort of loose. We know that he was in there for a couple days, and that he ended up flying back and then ran into some trouble. But he could have spoken to anybody while he was there. He could have any sort of emissaries while he was down there. So there are several of these opportunities he had when he could have been speaking with whomever. It just would have been nice to have been able to track his movements during certain periods when some really incredible meetings would have taken place.
It's kind of interesting that I see in your notes that he got arrested on his way back for not having a passport, that he left. He'd been staying in San Diego, and he claimed he left it in somebody's home in San Diego. That was kind of an interesting little story.
This is on his trip to Las Vegas, and he used a forged pass. It was somebody else's passport that they
it wasn't even his, and they figured out who he was by then.
His picture, and so they realized who he was after he had left Las Vegas, and the FBI stopped him and arrested him. And they were staying at somebody's home in in San Diego. I'm not sure where they picked him up, but the passport was still at this home. And he said he called one of his uplines who was still at the home, and he said, "Burn the passport now. Just burn it." Because it's one thing to lose your passport; it's another thing to have a forged passport. So they burned the passport, and so they held him up. They realized who he was. They knew he had a criminal record. What are you doing here? Blah blah blah. I'm just here on vacation. And while he's in FBI custody, Testa calls one of his uplines, one of the guys that he's there with. Testa says he can give him $240,000 in cash right now, and if he gives him a couple days, he can come up with another 250. Just let him know what he needs. And
wow. That guy was gonna be of value to the outfit, wasn't he? They wanted to do everything they could to take care of him.
Yeah, I imagine that 240 was what Testa had on hand, and the 250 is what he could get shipped in from Chicago really quick.
Wow.
So, but because they couldn't find the passport, they just deported him for illegal entry. It wasn't a crime for illegal passport. They just deported him, and so he was sent home, and he came and went. And he was not allowed back, as I understand.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, he dodged a bullet and get rid of that passport because they'd love to put him in the courts and hold him there without bond because he's a foreigner and over here without under a fake name and everything, so he's liable to run and then you can put pressure on him and you can hold him and keep those hearings put off for months and months, and he's sitting in the Metropolitan Correctional Center out there in San Diego, and it's hot and it's dirty and he doesn't know anybody.
Yep.
So that sometimes you can soften a guy up a little bit like that.
Yeah.
So what finally happens to him?
This whole time this is all going on.
Because we know that whole casino thing with Chicago is going to fall through. Everything falls through for Chicago. They're not going to be able to do any more business after 79 or 80.
Right. That's right. So the eventually Freeman and Smith and Freeman's getting a little older, and he's always been a ladies' man, and so in 1979 he was messing around with this guy's daughter, this guy named Jackie Freeman, and George Freeman is walking to his, I guess no relation. So George Freeman was walking to his home one night, and he was shot in the neck. The gun jammed as he was laying on the ground. George Freeman gets up and starts chasing him, you bastard. And the shooter runs off. It turns out it was this guy, Jackie Freeman. He was the father of one of George's younger girlfriends. He was later shot in his driveway. The man who was the alleged shooter was later shot in his driveway. But shortly after this, George Freeman sort of retires. While all this was going on, he had been slowly getting an addiction to Demerol. Not heroin or anything, but Demerol was sort of a classier thing. But just through the years, he had different, some pain. I think he had a back injury, but he had a Demerol addiction, and he just had it through the years. He died of lung cancer in 1990. He was a real heavy smoker, but he more or less retired in 1979, and it was really on the periphery. I think he's still kind of like a Lefty Rosenthal. He still played numbers and all, but he sort of, as I understood it, he came out with his biography. But as far as the real criminal world, there's not much said of him after 1979. I think that he lived off of numbers and gambling, and then Stan Smith's son overdosed in 1979, and at that time he sort of stepped away also. He had a large drug empire that he sort of turned over, so he had a lot of money. George Freeman had a lot of money. Stan Smith got a lot of religion. He was born again, and he lived the rest of his life as a very wealthy, true believer. Lennie McPherson continued in the criminal empire. He was older than the other two, but he continued. He was the boss, so he ran things from a distance. But he was sentenced to prison in the 1990s. He attacked a business rival and died of a heart attack in jail in 1996. He lived in a nice home with bulletproof glass and large gates, and his neighbors all had nothing but nice things to say about him. But yeah, he died in jail of a heart attack.
He was kind of the Tony Accardo of
yeah,
the Sydney crime family without, but he ended up going to jail, and he and Accardo, they never did get him, but he retired. He kind of became the professor emeritus, if you will. Or
exactly right. That's exactly right.
I got a feeling, but he still was sentenced on a last sentence. It looks like on an attack on a business rival. So the old man must have stayed after him pretty good. Those Aussies are tough down there, man. Those Aussies are some tough dudes down there.
They don't play.
Well, considering they came out of the prisons of England. England emptied their prisons into Australia and got it going. So it's I think it's historically been a pretty tough bunch of guys down there to do whatever they do down there, whether they're businessmen or criminals or in the military or whatever.
I think we were founded by people who didn't want to pay their taxes.
Yeah.
People who didn't. People who never paid their taxes.
Yeah, the whiskey rebellion. They just didn't want to pay the taxes on the whiskey they were making. Well, the government turned that one around, didn't they? If you didn't have to pay the taxes on booze, it would be about like 10 cents a bottle of whatever, 20 cents. They can make it for nothing. It's all taxes. Okay, well, that's interesting. You guys down in Australia, we got another one that we're going to do. It's going to be about the great bookie. It's going to be about the great bookie robbery, which sounds kind of interesting. So you can look for that to be going up one of these days. We'll put this one up first, put this one up pretty soon. And I say that you never know what the time lag between the time we record these things and when they go up. I figured out. I put up so many over the last couple of months that I don't have a whole lot left in the can. I'm trying to get some back in the can now. Yep. So some backup so I can all of a sudden take a month off and put a whole bunch of them up there ahead. I'm only staying 1 week ahead of myself now. I've got one up for next Monday, and we just had Joe the Shark Lopez was just up. He was an interesting guy.
My God, you had Joe Lopez.
Yeah, he's up there. It just went up, so you'll have to go listen to him. He tells a heck of a story about the outfit and cocaine dealing. So he always believe that the outfit, the mafia, does not deal in cocaine directly. Well, he's got a better story about that out of Chicago.
I usually get all the updates. I hadn't seen anything just yet, but I've been pretty crazy busy with this last couple.
Oh yeah, I know you have. I know you have. Especially with the rerouting of the trains, we won't even go down that path. But
that's right.
And I told you my son had the same problem in L.A. and Seattle too. So, oh well, that's been a hell of a year, hasn't it? 2020 is one for the books.
They can have it.
All right. Good night, folks. Good night, Cam. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Gary. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's just start. I'm gonna start a new file here too. I think it's easier for me, so I'm just gonna shut everything off and then open it back up again. I'll just call you back in a few minutes here.
All right.